Welcome, and this is lecture 3 on this exciting series on fluids and electrolytes. And we're still talking about sodium. Sodium is actually my favorite electrolyte, and it is the most difficult to understand. Once you get beyond sodium and later on metabolic acidosis, then the rest is going to be easy. So congratulations on making it this far. This proves that you are really committed to learning this topic. Is again one of the most exciting topics in medicine. So these lectures are going to accompany my book Manual of Fluid, Electrolyte, and Acid-Base Disorders, a Pathophysiologic Approach to Common Clinical Problems. I am Dr. Mohammad Tinawi, and this is the book. You can find more about it in the description. And we're still on Chapter 1, Disorders of Water Balance, Hyponatremia, and Hypernatremia. This is Part 3. Now, I'm going to summarize in a couple of minutes Lecture 1 and Lecture 2. The focus of Lecture 1 was that hyponatremia and hypernatremia are disorders of water metabolism. So we should think of the imbalance between sodium and water. Lecture 2, the focus was that vasopressin, or the antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, same names, okay, same thing, is the main hormone responsible for maintaining water and sodium balance in the body. Now, these are all the tools you need to solve any hyponatremia problem. So first, think that we have imbalance in sodium and water. Second, focus on the role of vasopressin. Now, let's take some examples. Now, we said that hypotonic hyponatremia is the most important type of hyponatremia. Hypertonic, in case of hyperglycemia, you're not going to see that very often. And isotonic hyponatremia, this is very rare. So in Lecture 2, we talked about hypotonic hyponatremia, and we said that with regard to volume, volume can be low, can be high, or can be euvolemic, can be normal. Now, hyponatremia with hypovolemia, examples are diarrhea, vomiting, these are the GI causes, and thiazide diuretic, this is an important renal cause. So this is a disorder of sodium and water. So what's actually going on here? Sodium drops more than water. So in diarrhea and vomiting, you're losing both sodium and water. So there's sodium loss and water loss. But sodium loss exceeds water loss. Same thing with the thiazide diuretics. And this is why you have hyponatremia. So here you have hyponatremia and the volume is low. Now, what about hyponatremia with hypervolemia? When you have signs of volume overload, you have pulmonary edema maybe, you have JVD, HJR, you have peripheral edema, ascites, etc. Like you can see in patients with heart failure and liver cirrhosis. Here you have an increase in both water and sodium, but the increase in water is what? More than sodium. So this is why we have hyponatremia. So really the exact opposites. Look at case 1 and case 2. In case 1, both sodium and water are low, but sodium goes down more than water, so you end up with hyponatremia. In case number 2, as in heart failure, liver cirrhosis, both go up. The sodium is up in heart failure, but the water is higher. The increase in water proportional to the sodium is more. This is why you end up with hyponatremia. And this is a summary of everything that we've talked about so far. And now this takes us to an even more exciting topic, hyponatremia with euvolemia. Euvolemia meaning the patient has normal volume, meaning we don't have signs of fluid overload or volume overload. This is where we see patients with the syndrome of inappropriate secretion of ADH, or SIADH. Before we can say that someone has SIADH, we want to make sure that they don't have hypothyroidism and that they don't have adrenal insufficiency. Now, to rule out hypothyroidism, we can easily check TSH and T4. If TSH is high, T4 is low, then you have hypothyroidism. I have to tell you something. It is rare to see edema and it's rare to see hyponatremia with hypothyroidism unless TSH is really high. It has to be above 50. So if you have a TSH of 10 or 15, then the hyponatremia is most likely not due to hypothyroidism. Now, adrenal insufficiency, you can have euvolemia, but in some cases the patient can be dehydrated. So it can be also hyponatremia with hypovolemia. At any rate, to exclude that, because it's although a rare condition, it's very serious to miss, you perform the ACTH stimulation test. You can look that up, but basically, first thing in the morning at 6 a.m., you measure a baseline serum cortisol. Then you give 250 microgram of cosinotropin, and you measure cortisol 30 minutes and 60 minutes later. If you get a serum cortisol level after the stimulation above 18 to 20, then you've excluded the diagnosis. So basically between the first measurement and the second measurement, it should go up by 7 to 10. Same thing between the second and the third measurement. If that doesn't happen, then you need to consult your friendly endocrinologist to solve that issue. If you have acute adrenal insufficiency, you have, before you do any testing, if you suspect that, like someone after steroid withdrawal, you have to give 0.9 saline and 100 milligram of hydrocortisol. Then you worry about other things because this is a medical emergency. Okay, so now we're suspecting SIADH, and I have to say that in hypothyroidism and adrenal insufficiency, the reason for the hyponatremia is increased vasopressin secretion. So it is like ADH, except that we know why. We have the reason. With SIADH, it's inappropriate secretion. In hypothyroidism and adrenal insufficiency, this is the cause of vasopressin secretion. Okay, now we really have to emphasize that. In order to make a diagnosis of SIADH, the patient has to be euvolemic. There has to be normal volume. Now, this is not to say that these patients are immune from having hypervolemia, that they will never get heart failure or liver cirrhosis or edema. It means that you cannot make the diagnosis unless the patient is euvolemic. So, you cannot make that diagnosis if the patient has peripheral edema, pulmonary edema, or ascites. So what's going on here, because of the secretion of vasopressin or ADH, instead of having a dilute urine, you're going to have a concentrated urine or hyponatremia. In other words, normally with hyponatremia, you shut off your ADH secretion, and all that excess water goes into the urine. You have a decrease in urine osmolality. The urine is diluted due to water. But with SIADH, the reverse happens. The urine is concentrated. It has sodium in it. Okay. Now, a very legitimate question is, why is the patient euvolemic? Okay, I just said that with SIADH, you have increased vasopressin or ADH, and that will increase water absorption in the collecting tubule, and then you have excess water, and subsequently you have hypovolemia. Okay, so you have hyponatremia. So why is the patient euvolemic? Why we don't have fluid overload? That can be perplexing. So what's going on with SIADH? First, what is edema? The definition of edema, I'm not talking about lymphedema, I'm talking about pitting edema, like you see in congestive heart failure, is retention of both sodium and water. That doesn't happen in SIADH. In SIADH, there's increased secretion of vasopressin that causes water retention. Most of that water, like we said, 2/3 will go intracellular, inside the cells. Plus, you don't have sodium retention. Actually, sodium is down because there's increased excretion in the urine. There's increase in the atrial natriuretic peptide. So here you have increased water retention, but you have a decrease in sodium, increase in sodium excretion. In other words, this is why you don't have edema, because you don't have this retention of both sodium and water like happens in congestive heart failure. So this is very significant to know. And based on that, we can easily deduce the laboratory findings with SIADH. Of course, we're going to have hyponatremia. This is what? Hyponatremia with hypoosmolality. So we have low serum osmolality. Okay, it's a true hyponatremia. And therefore, serum osmolality is less than 280 milliosmol per kilogram of water. Now, urine osmolality is high. Now, that's significant, okay, because we said there's increase in sodium excretion in the urine, and it's high relative to serum osmolality, okay, so it's usually above 100, 200, but sometimes it's really high. Sometimes you get 600, 700, 800. So in other words, the patient cannot maximally dilute their urine. Their urine osmolality is high, higher than what it should be. Most of the times it's 300 or more. Urine sodium is high, usually more than 30 or 40 milliequivalents per liter. And to measure it, we can just do it on a spot, on a random urine test. Definitely, we don't need a 24-hour urine collection. Uric acid is usually low. This is not a very significant finding. Now, it would sure help if we can measure the ADH or the vasopressin, but this is not readily available in most laboratories, and it's not needed to make the diagnosis. What causes SIADH? Well, think of bad things, okay? CNS disease like tumors, abscesses, meningitis, Guillain-Barré, stroke, subarachnoid hemorrhage, malignancy, especially small cell lung cancer. I underline that, okay? Don't forget that. This is very important, okay? And in that type of cancer, there's ectopic ADH secretion. Other lung tumors, mediastinal tumors, prostate cancer, etc. Pulmonary disease, I underline pneumonia, very important, but you can see it in tuberculosis. Medications, what did I underline here? SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, okay? These are very significant. If you want to ask about two medications with hyponatremia, thiazide diuretics and SSRIs. Many patients are on those medications, okay? Nicotine can do it, the tricyclics can do it, carbamazepine, very common one, intravenous cyclophosphamide, not common, of course. AIDS can cause SIADH. Gain of function mutation, this is not common. This will make the kidney more receptive to the action of vasopressin. This is not common. Now, very common, though, is idiopathic. Many times you cannot find CNS disease or malignancy or pulmonary disease or medication, and it is idiopathic. So that's very important to know as well. Now, so we're done talking about hypotonic hyponatremia. Now, what are the symptoms of hyponatremia in general? Well, first I have to say, hyponatremia is very common in hospitalized patients. Why? Well, because we do that. We give them hypotonic fluid. So don't do that. Okay, again, please don't do it. Okay, most of the cases are iatrogenic. So 15 to 30% sometimes of hospitalized patients have hyponatremia. Okay. Even mild hyponatremia is associated with symptoms, even sodium 130, 129. You can have falls, you can have fractures, you can have neurological impairment, confusion, etc. Commonly, patients have gait problems, nausea, headache, but if the hyponatremia is severe, especially if it happens quickly, you can have encephalopathy, hyponatremic encephalopathy, here where you have disorientation, delirium, seizures, and even coma. Usually we're talking about sodium well below 120. Sometimes you see sodium close to 100. So what's going on here? The water shifts into the brain, okay? So the brain is hyperosmolar to the serum. So water shifts, and that causes all these problems. So the rapidity of hyponatremia determines the severity of symptoms. So if it happens slowly, you're going to have less symptoms. If it happens quickly, then you're going to have severe symptoms because of water shift, because the water moves into the brain, causing cerebral edema, herniation, and even death. Now, when it happens slowly, well, you're giving the brain time to adapt. So it loses sodium salts, potassium salts, osmolytes like amino acid, taurine, glutamine, glutamate, and that will lessen the shift of water from the blood into the brain. So now, what are the clinical sequelae of abrupt changes in serum sodium in general? So if we have rapid increase in sodium, whether we correct hyponatremia rapidly or whether we have acute and severe hypernatremia, here we can have osmotic demyelination. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, if you have a rapid decrease in serum sodium, like we were just talking about in acute hyponatremia, you can have cerebral edema because of shift of water into the brain cells. Now, what about rapid decrease in serum sodium due to rapid correction of chronic hypernatremia? Is it the same if we get someone with a serum sodium of 180 and in a day we drop it to 160? Is it the same like acute hyponatremia? The answer, well, maybe not. It's complicated, and we used to think yes. I will visit that more, talk about it in more details when we talk about hypernatremia. I'm going to end here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and see you in lecture 4.